On behalf of Miles Kuhn and Susan Williamson, I would like to welcome you to the 5th Annual Palm Beach Poetry Festival. At this time, I'd like to take a moment to thank our wonderful sponsors, Old School Square Cultural Arts Center, Morgan Stanley's Windler Fitzgerald Group of Atlanta, Books and Books, the official bookseller of the festival, Palm Beach County Cultural Council, the Palm Beach Post, WXCL, Palm Beach County, and the City of Delray Beach. The festival would not be what it is today if it wasn't for our generous donors and poetry supporters. I encourage you to take the time to visit our website, come to other scheduled events this week, and become more involved in our great organization as a poet, participant, donor, or audience member. The Palm Beach Poetry Festival was birthed 5 years ago as the vision of Miles and Mimi Kuhn. Since then, it's grown to a 6-day event. This year, we have participants from many states across the country. Our international constituent comes from the Grand Bahamas and Ireland this year. At this time, I would ask you all to silence your cell phones. Denise Duhamel is my mentor for several reasons. The first poem I ever liked at all was her piece, Why on a Bad Day I Can Relate to a Manatee. David Kirby introduced me to it and started me on the road that led me here tonight. Denise revels in an insatiable curiosity about the markers that define our culture and in turn define ourselves. The subjects of her books range from Native American folktales to pop culture icons to personal meditations on the endless unravelings of the unchangeable self. Her next volume, however, gives us a new way to see, know, and wonder at constant human truths. Tonight, she'll read from this new volume, Ka-Ching. I relate to her honesty, professionalism, and ability to find humor in every aspect of the human condition. Denise is a valuable advocate for the forces that amuse and oppose us, the qualities of modern life that engage and shock us. Most of all, I love that she makes me want to create poems. Please welcome with me my personal poetry goddess, Denise Duhamel.
Was Steve Gibson supposed to introduce me? No? No, okay, all right, because I just thought, wow, I'm gonna get 2 introductions, so I wasn't quite ready. I wanted to thank you so much for all coming out tonight. I feel very honored to be here on this very historic occasion, and I'll always remember, of course, where I was today. And I want to thank Miles for running such an amazing festival, and Laura, of course, and Nina and Jessica and Susan and Richard and Blaze for making my first day here quite amazing. As Laura said, I'm going to be reading tonight mostly from a new book called Ka-Ching. And Ka-Ching is an onomatopoeia word that means getting a windfall, like in a casino, like ka-ching, but it can also mean like, uh-oh, ka-ching, like I've lost everything. So I love that idea that it could be both. The first poem I'm going to read is an Alexiad, which I'm not even sure if that's what it's really called, but Campbell McGrath coined this phrase about Sherman Alexie's poems that often have 1 or 2 sentences at the beginning and 1 or 2 sentences at the end and a huge parenthetical thought in the middle. And that's what this poem is. In fact, the parenthetical thought is so long that I'm going to say open parentheses and close parentheses because you probably have forgotten what the first sentence was by the time I get to the end. It's called Lucky Me. For a while, I hated myself for not making it in prose, with movie rights and screen credits and meetings with stars and walk-on parts. Maybe, my friend Michael says, I simply wasn't hungry enough, but I was famished, open parentheses. I'd written 2 novels for adults and 1 for teens, none of which were published with covers, artwork on the front, and blurbs on the back. They were never put on bookshelves in libraries or in stores, never assigned a price or a barcode. Or I never had someone come up to me and say, hey, I'm in the middle of your novel, not bad. The titles were Precious Blood, That Song You Know, the one about love, and A Girl's Best Friend. Each took me several years to finish. And there was a screenplay called Headlines, a comedy about a weather girl in New York and her crazy brother who wants to become famous, but he has no real talent and is not a murderer or a winning pie-eating contestant, so he's pretty much screwed. I wrote that screenplay with Jim Fall, who had a great collection of movie posters and soundtracks. When we got stuck in our plot, we'd get up and dance. He later worked for Dolly Parton's production company and let me Xerox copies of Precious Blood in Dolly's office on Dolly's dime. I'm sorry, Dolly, I really thought the book would sell and there'd be a screenplay that Jim and I would write and you'd have a big part and compose a song called Precious Blood for the soundtrack, and that was how I was going to pay you back. Jim went on to direct Trick, a great movie, and he's directing now for TV. I went on to write Pickles, another screenplay, this one about a mother and daughter who are accepted to college the same year and even live in the same dorm. The mother gave up the daughter who is adopted by another family, and the two figure out slowly that they are related because they're in the same biology class. This was a comedy too, or so I thought. Michael read it and said it made him laugh, even though the jokes were a little broad and there were way too many logic problems. Jim had a boyfriend we were convinced would finance Headlines, but their relationship fell apart, and Headlines was never made or even optioned. Otherwise, I wouldn't be writing about it with such nostalgia and regret. Our agent, one of Jim's friends, just starting out, told me that maybe I should write a sample script for Cheers or a new show she thought I'd like called Roseanne. I'd never seen Cheers, but I wrote 2 Roseanne scripts, one having to do with DJ mauling Barbie dolls, and another one about Roseanne having a crush on Johnny Cash. Later, there was an episode about Roseanne having a thing for Wayne Newton, but I'd obviously picked the wrong celebrity and was never hired. I also wrote a few episodes of She TV, a vehicle for my friend who was a stand-up comic and wanted to be a VJ on VH1, but they told her she didn't have big enough boobs. She used to joke, "Just tell me who to blow to get this job and I'll do it." A line I tried too, but by then I was mostly writing poetry and the joke fell flat. The joke teller, me, more pathetic because she was just trying to get published in tiny literary magazines with print runs of 200 rather than make hundreds of thousands of dollars. I also wrote a few skits for Wake Up Jerusalem for another friend who was also trying to break into comedy or acting. But I didn't understand enough about Jewish culture, so my punchlines were always a bit off. I was typecast in real life as the kooky best friend to women who would later go on to play the kooky best friends in movies. Laura played Hal's best friend in Shallow Hal, and Mindy went on to play a schoolmarm in a Woody Allen film. And I was always just that far removed, my nose so close I could sniff each celebrity walk by. In 1986, I actually met Kevin Bacon at the premiere for Quicksilver, his bicycle messenger movie. Michael was an assistant to a talent agent and would get us tickets to go to events where we could eat cold salmon and fancy cheeses for free. Kevin probably knew Quicksilver was going to be a flop, but still, he was upbeat and kind. He asked me what I did for a living, and I told him that I was a writer, which was stretching it since at that point I was in grad school and teaching comp. Screenplays, he asked, with what seemed like genuine interest. But Jim and I hadn't started Headlines yet, so I said, "No, I'm a poet," at which point he drifted away. A few years earlier, I'd met Julia Roberts at a party for Star 80 at Eric Roberts' apartment. Michael said, "Mark my things, she's going to be the next big thing." I talked to Julia for a while and told Michael he was crazy. She was mousy. Her teeth seemed much smaller, less weight back then. I don't remember any kind of flashy smile. Her hair was that color that wasn't blonde or brown, and she seemed, well, dull. I predicted Madonna was a flash in the pan. Cyndi Lauper was the real singer, a star with staying power. I was proven wrong over and over again. Close parentheses. I remember eating one particularly delicious lunch at my Bank of America temp desk. Soda crackers and seedless grapes I lifted the night before at an event to promote Stepping Out, a movie starring Liza Minnelli. Michael called to say he had 2 free tickets to Tracy Ullman's one-woman show, The Big Love. "I'll be there," I said, "but I can't chat right now." It wasn't that my boss was around. I didn't want to talk because I knew Liza would never read my revised Pickles script, and I didn't want any false hope. I didn't want to talk because I was happy, scribbling "Lucky Me," a new poem on a crumpled Stepping Out parting napkin I'd fished out of the bottom of my Goodwill purse. Thank you, thanks. Thanks. The next poem I'm going to read is from a series I wrote of poems called $1 Million Worth of Play Money. And I wrote 10 poems, each worth $100,000. So that's how you get $1 million worth of play money. And I wrote them on the back of $100,000 bills that I found in a thrift store, which of course are fake. But basically, they look something like this. This is the bill. And then I wrote the poems on the back, prose poems on the back, to fit the exact. I mean, I had to fill up the whole bill. That was my project. And I'm really loving, if you haven't had a chance to see the visual poetry or the visual exhibit down the hall by Trisha and Mimi, it's fantastic. And anyway, I'm really interested in sort of that blend between art and poetry. So I will just read one of the bills. Anyway, this one is $400,000. My uncle was a big mucky-muck in a supermarket chain. He liked throwing lavish get-togethers with all the complimentary liquor he'd received from buyers. He was the first to serve Pringles, Orville Redenbacher's gourmet popcorn, Mrs. Field's cookies, Starburst fruit chews, Reese's Pieces, and Miller Lite, all free samples, he'd explain. He started voting Republican when he got rich, which led to all kinds of fiery arguments at the Christmas parties he'd host. My uncle had a silver tree decorated with blue glass balls, which seemed the height of luxury to me, and a snub to our traditional green one, our folksy homemade ornaments. But even though he drove a Cadillac now, he was loyal to his family, getting his nieces and nephews union jobs at the market as soon as we were 16. My high school friends who worked at factories and gas stations marveled at my cushy situation, my yearly raises, the time card I punched. Even if I worked only 8 minutes extra, the supermarket had to pay me a full quarter of an hour. I was required to wear a horrid red smock and chirp, "Have a nice day," the company's slogan, at the end of each transaction. The break room was filthy and the manager a lech. But even so, I knew I had it pretty good. My uncle looked a little like Richard Nixon, whom he defended until the end. Everyone will remember China, not Watergate, he said. My uncle's other idol was Frank Perdue, with whom he'd had a breakfast meeting once at a Dunkin' Donuts in Boston. He told this story over and over, as though Frank Perdue was as talented as Frank Sinatra. A hell of a man, my uncle cooed, a visionary. Frank wanted more room for his chickens in the meat case, more Perdue signs. He insisted that the supermarket brand price comparison posters be removed. My uncle was Nixon and Perdue was China, or maybe it was the other way around. The negotiations were fierce and went on for hours, the waitresses refilling their coffee cups, actually changing shifts. Both my uncle and Frank were on diets, but needing more energy to persevere, decided to split a maple frosted with sprinkles. When the check came, my uncle tried to pick it up. "No," Frank said, "I don't want any special favors. Let's go Dutch." The bill came to $1.33, and Frank Perdue, this is why he was rich, my uncle alleged, debated who should leave that extra penny. The next poem I'm going to read is a sestina, although I kind of cheat in the sestina, but you'll figure it out, I think, because I sort of give it away that I cheat. And it's called Delta Flight 659, and it's dedicated to Sean Penn. I'm writing this on a plane, Sean Penn, with my black Pilot Razor ballpoint pen. Ever since 911, I'm a nervous flyer. I leave my Pentium processor in Florida so TSA can't x-ray my stanzas, penetrate my persona. Maybe this should be an iambic pentameter rather than this mock sestina, each line ending in a pen variant. I convinced myself the ticket to Baghdad was too expensive. I contemplated going as a human shield. I read in open-mouthed shock that your trip there was a $56,000 expenditure. Is that true? I watched you on Larry King Live, his suspenders and tie, your open collar. You saw the war's impending mess. My husband gambled on my penumbra of doubt. So you stationed yourself in a food silo in Iraq. What happens to me if you get blown up? He begged me to stay home, to be his Penelope. I sit alone in coach, but last night I sat with 4 poets, depending on one another as readers in a Pittsburgh cafe. I tried to be your pen pal in 1987, not because of your pensive bad boy looks, but because of a poem you'd penned that appeared in an issue of Frank. I still see the poet in you, Sean Penn. You probably think fans like me are your penance for your popularity, your star bulging into a pentagon filled with witchy wannabes and penniless poets who waddle towards your icy peninsula of glamour like so many menacing penguins. But honest, I come in peace, Sean Penn, writing on my plane ride home. I want no part of your penthouse or the snowy slopes of your aspen. I won't stalk you like the swirling gride cloud over Pigpen. I have no script or stupendous novel I want you to option. I even like your wife, Robin Wright-Penn. I only want to keep myself busy on this flight to tell you of 4 penny-loafered poets in Pennsylvania who last night, chomping on primavera penne pasta, pondered poetry, celebrity, Iraq, the penitentiary of free speech, and how I reminded everyone that Sean Penn once wrote a poem. I peer out the window, caress my lucky pendant. Look, Sean Penn, the clouds are drawn with charcoal pencils. The sky is opening like a child's first stab at penmanship. The sun begins to ripen orange, then deepen. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks. Did you get that every last line ended in a pen variant? I just wanted to make sure because I've said it. I just didn't know if it made sense. But anyway, a sestina is a 39-line poem, each line ending with, supposed to be 6 intertwining words. But when you love Sean Penn, as much as I love Sean Penn, they all end in pen. And I was on the plane, so I didn't know actually the order. So I just kind of had to fake. I kind of knew, but I wasn't sure. The next set of poems I'm going to read are from a series in the book about my parents were in an accident in 2003 on an escalator, and it was a horrible kind of freak accident, disfiguring, terrible, terrible accident. And I put the poems into the book because the accident happened in a casino, and so there was like sort of the money thing oddly related. And I just wanted to read a quote that I use in one of the poems by Edwin Denby, who's a second-generation New York school poet, who also had a friend who was hurt very badly in an escalator accident, and he personifies the escalator as this. My father was a cheese grater, my mother was a stair. I'm a no-nonsense escalator, less I couldn't care. And I'm just going to read four of these poems, 4 of these little poems. The first one is called Casino. When my sister says there's been an accident, I think car, then bus, but she says no, escalator, and pile up. When my sister says the words mother and scalped, I think cowboys and Indians, tiny shrunken heads, the blood all boiled out, warpaths. When my sister says the word father and collapsed, I turn the TV sound down. It's Thursday morning, September 11th, 2003, the memorial, the reading of names. I had planned to go to BJ's and Publix today, shop for a dinner party tomorrow. It happened yesterday. Mom was in surgery overnight. The hospital is just calling now. Atlantic City, my sister says. I can drive there in 4 or 5 hours. I tell her I can fly. I hang up. Nick gets on the line. He finds a direct flight on Spirit. I remember my mother telling my sister and me to braid our hair before riding the Ferris wheel, and a story about a girl's loose curls flying into the gear, being torn out in chunks, her blood, warm red specks, dripping on the seats below. And how the carny had to stop the ride with a jolt, and how a fireman shot up in a bucket truck with a pair of scissors to release the screaming girl. When the ride went back on, the passengers got off one by one, no one smiling or laughing anymore. And I was never sure if my mother was on that ride or in the park that day, or if it was just a story she liked to tell. The girl's hair scattered, whipping by the horses in the merry-go-round, twisting into the cotton candy. And my mother's hair, also left behind in some gear, her blood soaking the silver escalator steps, the casino carpet, up and down and round, all the bald lemons and cherries spinning. This next one is called My Mother's Hair. And for those of you who are considerably younger than I am and younger than my mother, I'm going to mention there's something called a fall, which is sort of a precursor to hair extensions. Oh yeah, okay, a few people are nodding like they remember it. But basically it's like a half wig, and you put it on like here, and then it's like called a fall, and this flip thing happens. And then the other thing mentioned in here is a 45, and I only mention this, those are little records, because a friend of mine he came to read, and he wrote a poem about listening to 45s. And my students were saying, the young students were saying, like, well, I don't understand how a gun can sing. And I was like, I felt so old. I was like, oh my God. So 45s for you youngins are those little records, like LPs, but small and just have one song. I know, it's very sad to be this old. It's sad. I remember when that time when I was the same age as my students, more or less, and now it's like, it all started with, anyway, I won't tell you, but like all of a sudden when you can't understand the references in their poems, and anyway, it's very sad. Okay, it's called My Mother's Hair. My mother's fall on its styrofoam head, the shiny chestnut that girl flip that she wore out to dinner with her Fabergé perfume, which came in a glass bottle with a tiger fur cap. I couldn't help but make little fingernail moons in the styrofoam, whole eyebrows and lashes. The blank face scared me. It was the bumpy face of nightmares, monsters, people disappearing. I was glad when my mother put it away into the shiny tube-shaped case that I used for my 45s after her fall went out of style. She also had a 2-foot blonde braid that my sister wore with her gold-beaded unitard for her modern jazz recital, and I wore to a B-52's concert a few years later, swinging it around as I danced, afraid it might fall off and I'd lose it, the stunning synthetic snake. My mother trusted her real hair to Roger, whose beauty parlor had an entrance in Massachusetts and an exit in Rhode Island. I'd run back and forth through both doors playing fugitive until he sat me down with his hardcover books of glamorous bouffants. I'd lose myself in the swirling curls of the models in the beauty parlor paintings with bamboo frames that hung over the chairs in his waiting room. My mother seemed so much smaller when her hair was wet. The hairdryers looked like astronaut helmets. I was mesmerized by the black combs that bobbed in the aqua barbicide. Since her accident, my mother goes to a new stylist before she's technically open. She jokes with my mother, "Your scars don't bother me. I work part-time for a funeral parlor." I miss my mother's hair, her fake hair, her real hair, her teased hair, her perms. My mother gives me her headbands and bobby pins, saying, "I won't be using these anymore." I miss my mother's hair paraphernalia, the rinses, the rollers, the aquanet, the pin curls, the clear rain bonnet that folded into what looked like a tiny suitcase and disappeared. This next one is called Washing My Father's Hair. He can't take a shower because of the IV, the stitches on his hand. His whole body hurts, the kidney-shaped bruises on his side, plum lumps, the stiffness in his arms and legs. He bends his head into the sink, and I test the water's temperature and spray his hair with the same gadget I use to rinse the dishes. His hair darkens from white to gray. I accidentally squirt my shirt. I suds him hard because I know it's the one thing that actually might feel good. I once was small enough to take a bath in the same kitchen sink. Not that I'm the same I anymore, our longest living cells lasting only 10 years. I remember his wedding ring on the side of the soap dish and the way he wrapped me in a towel. Now his ring is jagged from the accident, not quite a circle anymore. I rinse him out fast when his back starts to cramp. I sit him down and rub his head as dry as I can. The comb makes rows where I used to practice the alphabet. And the last one I'll read from this series is called Healing Pies. After my parents' accident, the pies kept coming. Chicken pot pies, individual sized, blueberry pies, ice cream pies, peach cobblers, lemon meringues, pecan pies, pies that were still warm in their tins, apple pies, another chicken pot pie, a big square one, pies with chocolate pudding inside, rhubarb pies, cherry pies, pies with crisscross slats of crust on the top. Pies from the church, pies from my mother's quilting group, pies from the neighbors, pies from the aunts. Pies lined the kitchen counter, pies packed the freezer. Holy pies, pies with painkiller filling, herbal pies, prayer pies, pies that kept vigil, pies brimming with novenas, pies full of secrets that even doctors don't know, magic spell pies, smooth, soothing pies overflowing with the music of rainforests, pies made from circles of light, pies with halos. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. I've never read these poems aloud before, so thank you for letting me read them here first, I guess. This next poem is for Laura McDermott, and who's my poetry daughter. I know she has a real mother, but I'm like her godmother, I guess, of poetry. And it's an old poem, but I wanted to read it anyway because it was one of the poem written the first time I came to Florida. And it's called Why on a Bad Day I Can Relate to the Manatee. The manatee tries a diet of only seagrass, but still stays fat. Mistaking her for a mermaid from afar, sailors of long ago lost interest when they got too close, openly making fun of her chubbiness. She knows Rodney Dangerfield would write jokes about her if she were more popular. She's ashamed of her crooked teeth, her two big molars that leave her sucking and grinding with bad table manners. She swims towards danger over and over, scars from the motorboats on her back, reminders of her slow stupidness. She resents being called a sea cow. She hopes her whiskers don't show in the light. She is the mammal who knows about low self-esteem. I first met her on my honeymoon in southern Florida. I was on a cruise in my one-piece bathing suit. The women in bikinis squealed and pointed to the nearby dolphins, clapping so their sleek gray backs would come to the water's surface. In the shadow of her prettier ocean sister, the manatee swam by also. No one but I paid her much attention. I wanted to lend her my makeup, massage her spine, lend a girlfriend ear, and listen to her underwater troubles. I dreamt of her as I slept in the warmth of my new husband. I dreamt of her as he slept in the warmth of me. On a good day, too, I can relate to the manatee, who knows on some level that she is endangered and believes in mating for life. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. And then the last poem I'm going to read is about the anxiety that poets have, or speakers have, about the Q&A, and being asked a question and you don't know what to say, which happened to me this afternoon, actually, in my craft talk, when someone asked me what was the capital of North Dakota, and I actually tried to figure it out, and only realized after, well, I'm talking about humor, that's like a joke, but instead I'm like, is it Fargo? And then I wish I didn't, instead of getting it, I didn't get it. So. And I didn't get it till we were on to the next question, so it wouldn't have been too embarrassing to talk about. So there's a thing, there's a term for that in French, l'esprit de l'escalier, which is staircase wit, or wit of a staircase. And basically it means you think you're having an argument with someone, or someone asks you a question, and you freeze, right? But then when you walk down the stairs, you have the perfect comeback, but of course it's too late, because you can't run up the stairs and go, yeah, well, because you just look like a dummy. So basically, I'm going to mention that in this. And this is the last poem I'll read. And again, thank you all very much for coming and listening to me. It's called What Women Know. When the moderator asked us during the poetry readings Q&A, what do women know that men don't? I froze, then made a joke. Well, there's one crucial thing, but no way am I going to be the one to tell you. I thought of my friend Joe, who betrayed us all by telling the boys about the educational film, It's Wonderful Being a Girl. Joe was paid in nickels to whisper the secrets of blood in white pads, pink sanitary belts that looked like garters. The boys were grossed out and overused the word period and cramp to embarrass us. Don't write too fast, you might get a cramp. Wonder what we'll do in class next period. Ha ha ha, thanks a lot, Joe. She shrugged, wanting to be a boy, not a girl, hoping her period would never come if she refused training bras and Tiger Beat and the pocketbooks the rest of us carried with our modus tucked inside, so we'd be ready when those first drops dribbled during math class or history or science. We couldn't be sure. Joe wouldn't answer to her birth name, Joanne, and wore overalls and baseball caps that read Allied Auto, since her father worked there as a mechanic and she got them for free. I said something like, I believe gender is a construct, and luckily for me, the other poet on stage agreed, and the audience nodded as though I was making some kind of sense. Still, the moderator's question haunted me. Was there really something I knew that I didn't even know I knew? Was there something he and the male poet on stage knew that I didn't? The next morning, I took a walk through Houston before I left for the airport. I was the only pedestrian except for a barefoot drag queen in front of the pink taco cabana who asked, "Honey, do you have any change for the bus?" She'd had a rough night, I could tell. Her chin was full of stubble, her pageboy wig askew. Before I gave her the quarters that jangled in my trousers, I wanted to ask her, what do women know that men don't? But just as I was about to pose the question, she belched, a sound somewhere between a man burp and a woman burp, a sour cloud. I walked on and bought the New York Times and read a story about how soon Big Apple residents will be able to change their genders on their birth certificates, whether they've had a sex change surgery or not. And there was my answer, another case of l'esprit de l'escalier. If only I could have referenced that article last night to make my point. If only I'd whipped out my Florida driver's license, the big M crouched in the sex square. After standing in line for 6 hours at the DMV, I came home to a tentative voice on my answering machine. Please check your license. We may have made a mistake concerning your gender. If the information is correct, please ignore this message. If not, please come back tomorrow. You could tell the caller didn't want to offend. She was an F, or at least sounded like one, on the phone. I imagined the cubicle where she passed around my photo. Does this look like a transvestite to you? Does anyone remember taking this picture? Did she seem like a real woman? Ah, staircase wit. What I should have said to the moderator. I'm sorry, I'm unqualified to answer your question. I've been a man since the year 2000. There's no way I'm gonna wait in that long line again just to be a gal. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Denise, you never fail to amaze me. You're fabulous. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm Miles Kuhn. Nice to see you all in the audience. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I have the pleasure of saying a few words about Stephen Gibson, who will be introducing Martina Spada. Stephen teaches at Palm Beach Community College and has published 2 volumes of poetry, the latest being Masaccio's Expulsion. As Andrew Hudgens says in his foreword to this beautiful book, which is on sale in the bookstore, it's exhilarating for a book of poetry to implicitly ask us to suspend the useful, critical cant about the speaker. The lyric poet is speaking for himself, just like the rest of us. Like us, except more articulate, more thoughtful, more fully engaged. I could think of no one better to do the honors this evening for Martine. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Gibson.